Good evening, lovelies and gems. Welcome to the Nightcap News and Commentary. Today is Saturday, February 26th, 2022. Of course, tonight's episode, what else is there to talk about but Ukraine? I can give the updates I know, but in general, I would say go to the news sources that you tend to listen to, that you know are politically neutral and trustworthy. But I am going to say that I think maybe the best thing to come out of this all week has been the act of absolute solidarity that the world has shown, with very few exceptions. Most of the world has found all kinds of fascinating ways to make it very, very clear to Vladimir Putin that we do not approve of what he's doing. One moment, just one little moment. That's my cat. She picks this exact time of night every night to be obnoxious, and which actually brings to mind, just to go completely off topic for a minute. I've got friends starting a D&D campaign on Saturday night, and so I'm probably going to, in March sometime, change the show to Sunday evening instead of Saturday evening, because I very much want to play. So, Fred, Eater, thank you so much for being here tonight. Good evening, good evening. So it's like this. I hear people arguing about the history of Ukraine and whether Putin has any kind of ground to stand on. My opinion, from my reading of the history, from my understanding of the history, is no. Even if he did have some kind of historical claim to that ground, like taking it by force, you win hearts and minds. If he wanted Ukraine, then maybe he should have made a bid that made that attractive to Ukraine. Maybe he should have done something that might give Ukraine a mind to be like, oh, look, we could start like a trade union or something like that. Like, he could have taken steps that would have made some kind of alliance with Ukraine to be exceptionally appealing. But, apparently he's decided that he can reform the USSR. Or I don't know. I don't know how he thinks this is going to go for him. So of course, the United States, and among others, didn't just threaten sanctions. They've put the straight squeeze on the oligarchs. The way to get to Russia without us all starting down the path of mutually assured destruction is to understand a little bit about Russian culture. And one of those things is that it's basically run by the mob. Or at the very least, it's run in a very mob-like way. And so if you freeze the assets of the billionaires, if you do things that rock the Russian markets, if you make it very difficult for Russian business people to do Russian business anywhere with anyone, then sooner or later your societal gears are going to grind to a halt. So I've had a lot of people say that's not going to be far enough, that's not going to work. And no, I actually think that it will work, assuming that the sanctions are severe enough and global enough. Good evening, uh, Ira Metdolarum. America is so different. Good evening, the 42, and Peter of the 42, the 42. Um, uh, Thank you so much sharing the Alan symbol. Please forgive my Irish pronunciation or whichever Gaelic pronunciation that is. So I don't even know, and that's um, yeah. If I'm ever just speaking in another language, just assume I'm doing the best I can. Um, John Harbeck, thank you for being here tonight. Um, uh, okay. So yeah. No, I'm gonna get to that point. Ira Madolarum, I am. I We're getting there. We're getting there. So, um, the way to stop them from uh, managing to sustain a heavy military, heavy casualty campaign in Ukraine is to make it not just cost too much and, like grind the gears of their ability to get oil to put in their tanks and so on and so forth. Not only just all that stuff, but also making the people that he's made rich, that are, wealthy in his country and that run his economy really ticked off with how much money he's costing them, how much their commercial um, efforts are being hampered by his politics. Because it's a funny thing. Not that I'm a screaming champion of free market capitalism, which is a giant euphemism anyway for vulture capitalism. But um yeah, if the people who make money in his economy stop making money and nobody will do business with them, well, the markets don't care about your glory days, his retelling of history or your ideals or any like what is important to Putin is not what is important to the people who necessarily make billions of dollars. So those two things can be very, very different. And costing billionaires money ticks billionaires off. They don't want to pay taxes, no matter what country they're in. And they don't like to lose billions of dollars overnight. So that's a thing that's happening. At least in parts of Russia, in spite of the danger and with hundreds and hundreds of arrests, I'm assuming there will be hundreds more. Uh, at least some Russians, a sizable bit of Russia does not agree with what Putin is doing. So there's internal strife. And that's partly because to his own people, Putin has been framing this for a while as a resistance against NATO. So, and for the past 12 years, he has deeply criticized U.S. involvement in Afghanistan. So, his propaganda machine worked kind of really hard to make us increasingly have to defend like our drone war and stuff. I'm not saying there wasn't truth to their propaganda machine. I'm saying they took full advantage of the United States' every mistake in order to criticize us pointedly on the world stage and make us look like tyrants. And again, you make a country look like tyrants when they're being tyrants. And we do, in fact, engage in all the same stuff that I am criticizing Putin for in one form or another. But, well, not all of it, because Putin shifted on his people, on his own people very suddenly. All of a sudden, he's not resisting NATO. He is calling Ukrainians brothers with one side of his mouth and saying they were always Russian. Well, okay, if they're Russian, you're telling me you're killing your brothers. That's what you're doing. Oh, no. Guess they're not Russian enough, right? It's always a problem with these uh, Puritans. You're never pure enough. You're never good enough unless you're right there in that inner circle. So, uh, hmm. So on the one hand, he's practically calling them brothers and saying, well, Ukraine was always Russian, in which case he's killing his own. And then on the other hand, he's running over cars with his tanks and um, making slow but steady progress towards his goal. So here's what I'm going to say about the slow and steady progress. Ukraine has done a better job than was anticipated of holding their ground and fighting beautifully to defend themselves. That's always the thing about a war to defend one's own country. It tends to come with a lot of passion. Also, like everywhere else in the world, Ukrainians have been semi cooped up and dealing with the pandemic this entire time too. So just like people are pretty happy in the US and they're pretty happy in Australia right now, a little froggy. People are also a little froggy in Ukraine anyway. Ukrainians are absolutely as apt as Americans and Russians to say, "Oh, gonna walk into my backyard with that?" No, thank you. So, uh, not only is it against the law for Russian men between the ages of 18 and 60 to leave the country right now, like they are all signing up. But even if it were not against the law, it seems the Ukrainian will to defend its own borders and its own culture and not come under the rule of Vladimir Putin, who they have not chosen as their um, as their legitimate government. They're definitely like in that fight all the way. They're celebrities and anybody who's got the strength and the ability, they're out there. And of course, women and children are allowed to leave the country. People are certainly fleeing with their families. And then on the other hand, also, some people are choosing to stay. So, Poland has waived the pet visa. Ireland has waived its various visas. Hold on, now my cat's just screaming at me. She is something else, that Duchess of mine. Okay, so Ukrainian forces put up a better fight. Ukrainian militia is putting up a better fight than was expected. And Putin isn't didn't I think get as far as he wanted to be by now. He's run into more resistance than he expected. Social media is going crazy, and that is down to such an extent that Twitter was shut down in Russia because that's not going well. So now he's controlling the flow of media. He's acting more and more like the classic dictator. And I guess from a psychological perspective, that might give us an advantage. We understand this type of profile very, very well, and I think maybe to a high degree of accuracy, can predict how he intends to follow through, when he will back up, what his ego will and will not allow for. I think we are in serious danger of creating a situation, if it goes on long enough, if it becomes too seriously protracted, if he gains very serious ground and he can entrench himself and we've got a long ongoing conflict, we do run the risk of a World War III scenario. What I don't think that scenario actually looks like is the way that our science fiction has traditionally told it. I think it will be a lot more many countries having internal struggles, ongoing battles in left-wing versus right-wing ideologies playing out between countries, and then also internally within countries. More faction fighting than national fighting. There was at least one group of Russian soldiers that apparently had been led to believe kind of all along that this conflict was never going to turn into a shooting war. It was supposed to be a bluff. It was not going to turn into a shooting war. And so when it came right down to it, they wound up surrendering very, very quickly because they were legitimately not expecting to fight. And remember, part of Putin's claim all along here is that Ukraine is just basically little Russia. So if the soldiers are buying that claim, then maybe they don't want to shoot on little Russia. Just a thought. And it could also just be that, this is a clear violation of international law. Russia has defined territorial borders of culture and rights. They have their own democratically elected government. Now, to the criticism, well, that government's corrupt and it's all oligarchs and da-da. Okay. And, like, ours isn't? Is that not, in fact, the pot calling the kettle totally black? Putin's government is extremely corrupt. The United States government is broken and corrupt. Ukrainian government is still purging corruption and has embedded corruption. England, France, Germany, can we name a government that is corruption-free? I don't mean to draw too much of a false equivalence here, okay? I don't want to get into a testosterone pissing match about... Say hi to the camera. Say hi. Yeah, she refuses to look at cameras, so that's just a thing. Oh, cat. Stop this. I guess it comes down to, could it happen? Yes. Is it likely to happen? It's not impossible, but we're not talking about it being wildly likely either. Like, there's a lot of ways out of it, and it takes specific conditions to create a real World War III scenario in the world today. It's not like humans haven't been obsessing over the fact that we've been granted nuclear power for like a long, long time now. What is troublesome, of course, is that as we're seeing in Russia, what governments do and what people actually want, what the average citizens want, are often completely, they don't have a lot to do with each other. Uh, People can say no more war and have been saying no more war. I mean, literally for hundreds of years, but governments are like, oh yeah, no, we have an agenda and we've decided that the best way to get our way is to kill people, commit mass murder, and destroy infrastructure and make life miserable for people who have nothing to do with it. That's a choice that governments make. And every government runs a propaganda where they try to mitigate the horror of what they're doing. Oh, we only killed military, or we hit exactly what we were intending to, and here's our justification. But when it gets right down to it, any conflict like this is killing regular men, women, and children. And Putin has uh definitely not made concessions for civilians. He just hasn't. I don't want to comment too much on too many of the details because, first, what's happening on the ground right now is very fast acting. And second, I hesitate to report things that I've read when I don't have them fully verified and vetted. Rumor flies fast in times of conflict. Stories will catch on and people will say, oh, hey, that's great, or oh, that's terrible. And then we find out, even just 48, 72 hours later, that was complete bogus. It just served a purpose at a time. So I hesitate to comment on any of the specifics because I have not gotten to spend nearly as much time as I wish I had this week verifying and vetting specific reports of specific actions. But we know that there's significant resistance. Putin isn't going as far as he wanted to go, as fast as he wanted to go. Bridge takeouts have been one part of that problem. I have heard that they're having mobile connection issues. And of course, the world is in various ways saying, oh, you are so on your own on this one, buddy. So that's a thing that's happening. Will he be able to sustain? He has quite a bit of money of his own. He is only at this point committed to just under a third of his available troops to this campaign. So he has 2/3 of his troops probably ready to mobilize or very close to ready to mobilize, but not mobilized yet. He could bring a lot more force into this situation. He is totally capable of continuing to escalate this situation if a clear resolution is not reached quickly. And that is not a situation that we want to see happen. So I still think that the goal is to attempt to find a way to de-escalate this within a matter of weeks or days. We do not need to be in a situation where Russia is allowed to continue a protracted campaign in an incursion into Ukrainian territory. Kazakhstan didn't just straight up denied Putin. He asked for reinforcements. He lost. He's already lost 1,000 men, and I think actually over that now. And he asked for reinforcements, and Kazakhstan was like, nope. And they're supposed to be an ally of his, so that was something that, as it's from my understanding, he was not expecting Kazakhstan to not support him. I think part of the problem is that Putin has a glorified idea. I think he surrounds himself with yes men and this idea of order, and he is certain that he is popular enough and that his country is working well enough that people will just go along with his romantic vision of recreating a great new Russian empire. I've often said one of the things that's most striking about Vladimir Putin is that in some ways he carries himself like an old world prince. He's ruthless and he's arrogant, and I believe the word is cocksure. You know, very very convinced of his manifest destiny and his path to glory. And that may be blinding him to how much everybody was kind of maybe willing to entertain his romantic notion in a sort of philosophical, oh, wouldn't it be nice sort of way, but not necessarily be dedicated to committing troops, money, personnel, or supplies to what they see as a failed cause, because the Western world is just not going to sit by and go, oh yes, we're going to let a right wing, a hard right wing dictator uh, walk across his neighbor's border and just takes what he pleases and makes. So he made this decree right before the military invasion started. Um, he made a decree declaring 2 regions of Ukraine to be independent and sovereign territories. I think it's interesting that he made them sovereign territories, because then he's not really saying that he owns them. He's declaring them completely, he declared them independent. I think that was an interesting choice. He didn't say you're conquered. He said, you're your own country now because I said so. Like, since when has it ever worked that way? And turns out his moves are so unpopular that even primarily pro-Russian rhetoric Ukrainians, people who speak Russian, the people on that border, the regions that are considered, largely more Russian influenced than other parts of Ukraine, are just like, no, man, this is still our home. That's still our streets. You're driving your tanks down. You cannot do this. You cannot just come in and declare us you because you decided to yesterday. So that's a thing that's happening. I'm going to pivot here in just a moment. Before I do, I want to bring up what you and me and the average American, some things that we can do when we cannot do anything. So the average American at best can sign a petition and donate like $2 for a relief effort. They can put their change here and there. That's monetarily the best the average American is going to be able to do. Another option would be to riff off of what we've learned from grassroots fundraising during political campaigns. You when you're supporting a candidate, you buy his stickers and you buy his hats, you buy his refrigerator magnets, and you buy the sign. It costs too much and it's going to get busted up in the November weather before Christmas. But you buy the sign, and all of that money is going into the candidacy and the campaign. And you can make even small dollar donations. In Bernie Sanders' first campaign, which showed how amazingly grassroots fundraising actually really can work. It really demonstrated it for a lot of people. His average donation was about $27. In his next campaign, that went up to $32, and then I think $37 a pop. So there's a version of this that we can do for Ukrainians right now. We can go to our local grocery stores and we can buy products of Ukraine. You can go to your local liquor store. You can buy a couple of bottles of Ukrainian vodka. If you are not a drinker of vodka, and I am not, just know that vodka has an amazing number of other arts, crafts, tinctures, even cleaning product uses. You can find something to do with a bottle of vodka. And if nothing else, believe it or not, it's good to have in your med kit. So, you know, Ukrainian vodka. A major export of Ukraine is sunflower oil. I did not know this. Sunflower seeds and sunflower oil, all kinds of things. Sunflower, if you now would be the time to flush the Ukrainian economy with as much cash as you possibly can, as quickly as you possibly can. If for no other reason than just doing so, even if that money does not wind up reaching their economy, given, current things, it creates market conditions that shows where the support of average people are. So we're going to pivot here in just a moment. But before we do, I want to get to some of your lovely comments. And I'm going to have to scroll up because I let them go on for quite a while. And of course, they go fairly quickly sometime. Oh, excellent. Okay. John Harbeck. Though Putin does seem hell-bent on mutual destruction, like that is really winning. I'm not sure he's hell-bent on it. I think that he believes his own rhetoric, which is that the EU and the US are basically too internally corrupt and crippled to stop him. I think he believed that Ukraine and NATO would capitulate as soon as he started talking about using his more advanced weaponry. And then, of course, they did not. NATO has sent in troops, is my understanding. I don't know where those troops are at the moment, but I know that I believe the plan is that NATO troops will be deployed. Peter, thank you so much for this wonderful comment. The only way to win is by not playing. We're talking here about whether we're going to go nuclear. Yeah, there's no winning. There's setting off nuclear warheads is not winning. What I always wonder this about people who go to war this way. What do you want? A nation of corpses? What do you gain from the accumulation of real estate that you just destroyed? Yeah. It seems odd. Oh, excellent. Hello, Jonas. Welcome to the show. Also, welcome, baby kitten. Hello. John Harbeck. What's really scary is actually the number of Americans I've been seeing who are happy watching this and celebrating Russia destroying homes and a way of life that on a civilian level is very different. And by far, Ukraine is more progressive than Russia, even with their problems. Oh, ain't that the truth? I don't think by American standards we would necessarily call Ukraine a progressive nation, but they were definitely progressing, like at the very minimum, even if you disagree with many decisions and propaganda choices and that Ukraine has made, you can at the very least say Ukraine was addressing its issues and it was progressing. at least for the time being. A lot of progress looks like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. There are no angels in war or politics. There may be heroes, but there are no angels, okay? Again, our entire world system is kind of reliant on a number of compromised corruptions. So saying this government is corrupt or that government corrupt may not be the comparison we want to make, because we're all just the pots calling the kettle black there. And I think it opens the door for people that I'm ideologically opposed to, the hard right wing, to create the notion, the perception of false equivalency by eradicating nuance in each individual situation. There's a lot of history that goes into this situation here, and I don't pretend to understand it. I'm not going to pretend like I'm some kind of expert on that. So, all right. So I do want to pivot just a little bit to where this show actually was going to start this week. I had something very different in mind at the beginning of the week than I do today. Originally, I was going to talk about control. Control has, like gravity or any other force of nature, control has specific characteristics, ways that it will work and ways that it will not work. I had wanted to talk about open hand control. I'd wanted to talk about, this is February. We were supposed to be doing not doom scrolling this month. And instead, here we are ending the love month with total doom scrolling. And I'm sorry for that. I wish we could get our act together. I wish we could learn to have meaningful, rational conversations instead of deciding that our problems were solved by murdering people who yesterday had done nothing to us. Just, insane. I'll never understand. Apparently, I'm not a psychopath. Or at the very least, I'm not that kind of psychopath. No, I'm legit probably not a psychopath. Anyway, what I wanted to pivot to, however, was fascism right here in the good U.S. of A. Because people are saying, well, we can't support Ukraine because it made heroes of neo-Nazis. And I'm like, we elected a guy who behaved like a picture-perfect paper doll patsy for the neo-Nazis. Did he do that knowingly and willingly? I don't know. Okay? I gotta tell you, I don't think he's terribly bright. I think he can be, I think if he is flattered enough, I think his ego is so huge that if he's flattered enough, he will repeat anything to stay in the in crowd. I don't even know that he has to, at least initially, believe it. He certainly believes himself, but I don't know. There is evidence that he's a legitimate neo-Nazi based on his own words, things that he has actually said. There's also evidence that he's just taking advantage of neo-Nazis' love for his hard right-wing white Christian rhetoric. So I don't know how much of a neo-Nazi Trump himself is. But if we want to talk about glorifying Nazism, the right wing has spent the last 2 years weirdly finding ways to glorify Nazism while screaming that mask mandates are gulag level tyranny. It's the hypocrisy on this drives me up the wall. It really does. But if we're gonna say, well, there's a wing of Ukraine that's right-wing neo-Nazis, I'm gonna be like, there's a wing of the United States that's right-wing neo-Nazis. So if Putin decides tomorrow that the state of Alaska, which historically belongs to him also, I'm not saying it does historically. I mean, it does and it doesn't. Russia sold that to us fair and square. They make no claim on that territory. They bitterly regretted it after the fact, but I have not seen them make any gesture towards thinking that they can just take the state of Alaska. But if they did, and we asked Canada to help defend Alaska, which makes sense. We're close allies. They're our northern neighbor, and they're right next to Alaska, closer than we are, in fact. And they said, well, I'm sorry, we can't help you. You have a sizable portion, 30% of your country is spouting racist rhetoric, and maybe 3-4% of them are legitimately neo-Nazis, and you're like, that's a reason that we can't defend Alaska. So I kind of object to that. I feel like it's very much a strawman argument. It's kind of whataboutism. There is simply no excuse for Russia to try to take by force what is the sovereign territorial lands of another nation. So I don't see how we splice that or equivocate on that. And the good news is I am not alone in that stance. From Ireland to Poland, dozens and dozens of countries standing up for Ukraine right now. Tragedy has the most impressive way of bringing out certain commonalities in the human spirit. So we had all the buildings lighting up all over the world last night in the Ukrainian flag colors. For example, demonstrations in Georgia, Moscow, St. Petersburg, and all over the world, big demonstrations. That is, we hate that the tragedy happens, but that is a hopeful thing. The world is thinking harder and harder and harder about, do we need to use bombs and guns as a method to forward our own agendas? And I think increasingly the world is finding other ways to forward our agendas. Cyber warfare, for example, is going to be the next big thing. I'm pretty sure. For now, Russia's still fighting an extremely conventional war. And because of that, he may be at a disadvantage that he doesn't see coming. The world is, when we say we're not going to send in troops as our first resort, what we actually immediately have is not so much an option off the table as the big obvious option out of the way so that all the other options can be considered. It really kind of opens up your tactical playing field when you don't decide to start with the soldiers. Oh, Peter Kinch reminding us that the Republican Party didn't even bother to hide a Nazi rune in a stage design. Yeah. Yeah, I remember that. That should have been a bigger scandal. It really should have. And something else that is in danger of being buried is something that I want to just get back fairly quickly to as we start to wrap up for the evening, which is that while all of this is going on, all the things that we were talking about prior to Russia invading Ukraine are also still going on. So we have the issue of Amir Locke. That is still going on. We have to keep public pressure. We can't just bury that because the next new and interesting story has come along. That was a man whose civil Second Amendment rights were violated without him having committed a crime. He wasn't the subject of a warrant. He was simply a black man who had a gun that he lawfully had the right to carry. The mainstream news media is not going to cover this story during prime time. Now, it's very unlikely that they will dedicate a whole lot of primetime minutes to it. They may make mention of it in order to say, yeah, we said something, but it won't be at convenient times. They won't keep the pressure on. And so it is up to you and me and those of us who care to, again, make our voices on this subject clear, which is that our Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, along with every other constitutional right guaranteed to us in the Bill of Rights, in those first 10 amendments, does not alter or change based on whether or not the police are executing a search warrant and or whether the police are in contact with anyone, whether they're a suspect, a witness, just a contact, and certainly not on the color of their skin or their perceived socioeconomic status. It is Second Amendment right for all that the police must respect, unless they have a significant reason to believe that the gun a subject is holding is a direct threat to them in that exact moment. Like, if you watch the video, he comes out of the blanket. He's already got the gun in the air. He doesn't have time to point it at anybody. It's actually not pointing off. It's not pointing at the officers at all. It's kind of pointing in a nondescript random direction. If he had been reaching his hand out to drop that gun, we wouldn't have known it because they killed him before he had the chance. So don't allow them to bury the stories of what was already happening, to distract from where you were last week. Yes, now we also have to deal with this issue. But that does not make what we were dealing with internally here in the United States any less of an issue. This is one of the things that happens like clockwork, right? And some of you, I'm sure, are going to entertain some very elaborate speculations regarding how deliberate that may be. But it does seem like every time the U.S. is in a position to maybe start working on itself and going to a little self-care, a little self-investment, then something happens around the world and we go, oh, we can put off our own problems till later because, we're dealing with somebody else's problems now. And we've been doing that for so long that we haven't taken care of ourselves. We're breaking in at large sectors of our infrastructure, our commercial infrastructure, our military infrastructure, our federal government, our social safety net, all has significant mistreatment, corruption, and just levels of not working. Laws and bureaucracies and procedures that do not even make sense in today's more highly electronic world, given today's economy, other things that should have been updated over the past 15 to 25 years, 10 years, 5 years, whatever it happens to be, and just hasn't been because we are constantly distracted by what we're getting involved in somewhere else and not investing in ourselves. So we have to keep doing this hard work at home, even if the media decides to go 24/7, feeding us stories of Ukrainian heroes and Putin's every move. So please don't forget that. Please say his name. Talk about Amir Locke and his Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms within the confines of a private home. Please. And buy Ukrainian if you can figure out how to get that done this week. Let's see here. Other news I wanted to cover real quick. I know there were some unrelated things prior to all this horrible, distracting news that I had wanted to cover. Oh, anybody got something? Anybody got something that came up this week that you are interested in talking about? Maybe next week or even right here towards the end. If anybody's got anything to chat about, we could definitely do that. Cyber warfare with China is another deep area of concern. So China is not openly condemning Russia the way the rest of the world is, but neither are they, signaling some kind of rousing support. They're not going, rah, rah, Russia today either. So there's still a concern that while Russia is playing patty cake in Ukraine, I'm sorry, that was a terribly belittling and demeaning way to put that. While Russia is actively invading Ukraine and all the chaos that it's causing, all the death, the destruction, and the chaos, the refugees, and so on and so forth, while that is happening, is it possible that China makes a move on Taiwan, which they've been signaling their clear intent to do for a hot minute? Is it possible that they take this opportunity to screw down on Hong Kong again? Yeah. Yeah, it is possible. So we also need to watch China. They're in a tech war with us, and they are well ahead because, again, the United States didn't consider relaxing any policies to keep up with what average Americans were going to be able to do. I read a story. This was back before I was like fact checking stories at all. There basically were not fact checkers. So if you read a story, you kind of had to just consider the source and decide whether or not that was maybe something that you could believe. And I do not even remember the source of this story anymore, but I read a story that years ago, that the FBI got so desperate for hackers that they weren't drug testing for pot because they couldn't get enough of their own legit hackers. I don't know if that story is true or not. That might have just been an early internet rumor, or maybe somebody's wish list. But I did read that at one point. We fell way behind. We weren't willing enough to relax our rules, and we weren't willing to pay enough to be enticing. We have to get over the idea that austerity is going to lead us to prosperity. It does not. It does not. Okay. Let's see here. Voting rights. Oh, Fred, you're absolutely right. If there's anything maybe more important to be talking about than Ukraine right now today in the United States, it is our election mechanisms and our voting rights systems. So thank you very much. We are going to be doing that maybe next week. I hate committing on Sunday because then I spend all week ruminating and thinking about, what am I going to do, and watching the news and seeing what comes up. But voting rights, big thing that specifically our election mechanisms, we need to talk about that clearly and precisely. We need to talk about how to identify and correct both brokenness and corruption. Those are both happening separately and simultaneously. Sometimes they're intertwined. Sometimes the brokenness causes the corruption. Sometimes the corruption causes the brokenness. Sometimes they just exist, as in the case of a single corrupt person in an otherwise not entirely corrupt or not at all corrupt department. So we need to talk about the mechanisms and how we, the people, can begin to address the mechanisms within our election and voting systems themselves to make sure that we have fair, equitable, and absolutely secure access to the ballot box, which is accessible to every single eligible American voter and not accessible to anybody else. That's a reasonable ask, right? Housing and food security. My goodness, yes, absolutely. Housing and food security. We have talked a little bit about that before, but I feel like we definitely glanced over the issue. And again, there's one where we can get right down into the mechanisms, what is creating the housing shortages and issues, and the specific mechanisms that academically we actually know we could implement. And this kicks back a little bit to last week's episode, which I didn't expect to get to at all, which is that the correct answer in this moment for us as a country internally is to begin the process of building legacy. We can not only just build houses, we can build beautiful houses, we can rethink houses, we can build grand houses, we can build houses that will stand the test of time and will be considered wonderful properties in 200, 300 years, buildings worth preserving and keeping. We can create real legacy and ergo true and appreciating value by addressing the horrendous housing crisis. So that is a great suggestion. Thank you so much, Peter, for that. And that's the subject of Fred Eater's podcast. Big shout out here to one of my most consistent commenters and followers on this channel, Fred Eater. Now, if you do not know, Fred Eater has a Spotify podcast, and a podcast there on Spotify called Fred's Front Porch. I don't know if you have the ability, Fred, to drop a link in the comments, but if you want to do that, I'm sure people would love to be able to get to that. Fred is just one of the most insightful and thoughtful people that I have had the pleasure to know in the online sphere. And so big shout out to him and his incredible podcast. If you have never heard of it, then you're missing out. You've heard of it now. Go check it out. Fred's Front Porch on Spotify. Um, John Harbeck, for starters, stop changing districts. That was my thought too. And I remember I said something, and I knew this was going to happen sooner or later, that I was going to say something cocky, and then weeks later be like, should I have said that? Did I kind of sound like a moron? And one of those things is, why do we change districts? Why is redistricting done? Exactly. And I thought, well, yeah, we built this mechanism in. What is it supposed to reflect? How is it designed to work? What about the design itself is flawed? What about how we're not implementing the design as designed is now broken or flawed? So, redistricting, along with some of those other voting mechanisms, why do we do it? Well, of course, populations shift, and they shift rapidly. You do not necessarily have the same people in a town uh, every 2 years or every 5 years. Yes, there will be a sizable percentage that will be there for years and years, decades and decades even, but there will also be, over the course of time, changing demographics. And I think the idea is that any district or region is supposed to be trying to serve its constituents as they actually are today, not as opposed to how the constituency might have looked even 4 years ago, because a lot can change in 4 years. Towns can, in fact, flip radically from blue to red. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. They can flip radically blue to red or red to blue, or some interesting shade of purple, or even go their kind of their own polka dotted way in a very short amount of time, if given the right environment to do so. So, is our redistricting methods and techniques working to address that issue? Is that what they're supposed to do? Is it doing it as well as it should? I think we could probably all agree no. But maybe I need to do more looking at what it is, why it is, how it's supposed to work, and why it's not working. And I'd love to get into that. That's one of the election mechanisms that I think Americans are maybe pretty murky about. And so I'd love to go on an adventure with you guys, and we can maybe make ourselves a little less murky on that. uh, humanity forward. Humanity forward. Yeah. Yeah, that actually that brings us to the end of our show today. Thank you, Peter, Fred, John. Thank you everyone who joined in, whether you were active in the chat tonight or not, whether you commented, whether you ever comment. If you're just here hanging out, if you're watching the show after it's been posted, thank you so much for joining us, joining me. I appreciate your support. And as always, of course, have a wonderful, safe, happy, and healthy rest of your weekend. And please live long and prosper. Good night. Oh, that was 100% not the. There we go. Good night.